Do you know why the German Air Force changed its tactics, or how 100 tons of metal moved through the sky? If you follow this story to the end, the secret is hidden right in there. Start by liking the video right now. Part 1. The Overtake Spring 1943. 25,000 feet over occupied France. A Focke-Wulf pilot has positioned himself behind an American bomber formation and is about to do the only thing his training tells him to do: close in from astern and open fire. He has flown this attack against everything the Royal Air Force has put over Europe. It works. From behind, you have time. Time to close, time to settle, time to aim, time to fire a long burst and watch the strikes and correct. Now watch the arithmetic he is about to run into. His aircraft is capable of something north of 400 miles an hour. The bomber box in front of him is grinding along at an indicated speed that is far lower. That difference, the overtake, is the thing that gives him his firing time. It also gives them theirs. At that rate of closure, he needs somewhere in the region of 20 to 30 seconds to come from the edge of their range into his own effective firing range, take his shot, and break away. 30 seconds is a very long time to be in front of guns. And here is what is in front of him. Not one bomber, not one tail gunner. The formation ahead of him has been arranged so that his approach path is simultaneously covered by the tail guns, upper turrets, ball turrets, and waist guns of 8, 10, 15 aircraft at once, an overlapping volume of fire that he must fly through, straight, at a predictable closing rate, for half a minute in order to reach a firing position. It is the most heavily defended piece of sky on the planet, and the geometry has been designed specifically so that he must fly through the middle of it. Luftwaffe pilots worked this out fast, because the alternative to working it out was dying. Within a matter of months, the stern attack against American day bombers had gone from standard practice to something experienced pilots avoided. They did not stop attacking. They found a different door. And the story of how they found it, what the Americans did about it, and what the whole exchange actually cost, in a currency that was not aircraft, is the most misunderstood argument of the air war, because both sides came out of it believing things about the defensive firepower of a B-17 that were not true. Part 2. LeMay's geometry. The formation that Pilot was looking at had a name: the combat box. And it was not evolved by committee, it was worked out, largely, by one man. Curtis LeMay was a colonel commanding the 305th Bomb Group in England in late 1942, and he had a habit that made him unusual among bomber commanders, which was that he treated flying as an engineering problem rather than an art. He did it twice, and both times the answer horrified his crews. First, the bomb run. Standard practice was to take evasive action through the flak. LeMay went back to his old gunnery texts, worked out the probability of a heavy anti-aircraft battery actually hitting a specific aircraft at altitude, and concluded that evasive action bought almost nothing while destroying bombing accuracy, which meant you would have to come back and do the whole thing again. So he ordered his groups to fly straight and level through the flak on the bomb run. His crews thought he was insane. He flew the lead aircraft himself on the first mission he ordered it. Second, the formation. And this is the one that matters. The problem is that a bomber's guns are fixed to a bomber, and a bomber has blind spots, places where the structure of the aircraft itself means nothing can be brought to bear. Every aircraft in the war had them. You cannot engineer them away, but you can cover another aircraft's blind spot with your own guns, if you position yourself correctly relative to him. So LeMay and his staff worked out a three-dimensional arrangement. A group of 18, later 21 aircraft, split into 3 squadron elements. One at the base altitude, one stacked above and offset, one stacked below and offset the other way. Each aircraft placed so that it did not mask the guns of the aircraft behind it, and so that every likely attack approach was covered by more than one gun position from more than one aircraft. Then you stack the boxes. 3 groups make a combat wing. Wings stack into divisions. On a maximum effort mission, the 8th Air Force could put a formation into the sky that was miles long and step through thousands of feet of altitude, every element geometrically related to every other one. The numbers are what everyone remembers. A late-model B-17G carried 1350 caliber machine guns, chin turret, cheek positions, upper turret, ball turret, waist positions, tail, and one in the radio room. 21 of them in a group box, is 273 guns. A combat wing of 54 aircraft is 700. A 1,000-bomber mission is a number with 4 digits in it. That is the picture that went into the newsreels and the recruiting posters. The flying fortress. The formation as a single armored animal. Hold on to that number, because in Part 4 I am going to take most of it away from you. The men in this story spent the war standing at open windows in 50 degrees of frost. If you think they're worth keeping visible, hit the like button. It takes a second, and it puts them in front of people who care about getting this right. Part 3. Egon Meyer's Door. The man who found the way in was a Luftwaffe officer named Egon Meyer of Jagdgeschwader II, one of the 2 fighter wings holding the French coast. Meyer was an exceptional pilot. He would end up credited with something over 100 victories, but the reason his name matters is not his score. It is that he looked at the same arithmetic the pilot in Part 1 was looking at and solved it in the opposite direction. If the problem with the stern attack is that the overtake is too slow, then do not attack from the stern, attack from directly ahead. In a head-on pass, the closure is not the difference between the 2 speeds. It is the sum of them. A fighter at 400 miles an hour meeting a bomber formation coming the other way produces a combined closing rate of something in the region of 550 miles an hour. At that rate, the fighter crosses from the outer edge of the defensive envelope to a break-off point in about 2 seconds. 2 seconds instead of 30. And the target he is aiming at has, in the early B-17 models, almost nothing pointing forward. A gun or 2 in the nose, handheld, aimed by a bombardier through a small window, in a position with very poor visibility along the aircraft's axis. The entire elaborate geometry of the combat box was built around covering the approaches an attacker was expected to use, and the frontal cone was the thinnest part of it. Meyer led the first coordinated frontal attacks against American formations in late 1942 over the U-boat pens on the French coast, and within months it had become standard Luftwaffe practice. It was also appalling to fly. 2 seconds is not long enough to aim properly. Pilots described it as pointing the aircraft rather than shooting, and the closure was so fast that misjudging the break-off by a fraction meant flying into a bomber at a combined 500 miles an hour. Men were killed doing this by collision, not gunfire. But it worked, because the exchange rate had inverted. The fighter spent 2 seconds exposed instead of 30, and he arrived at the least defended part of the target. The American response took about 9 months and came in the form of a machine. From the autumn of 1943, the B-17G rolled out with a chin turret under the nose, 2 50 caliber guns in a powered mount, aimed remotely by the bombardier. The door Meyer had found was closed. Egon Meyer did not live to see how the argument ended. He was shot down and killed on the 2nd of March 1944 by American fighters. Part 4. The number that was not true. Now I have to take back most of Part 2, because this is the part of the story that almost never gets told, and it changes everything. On the 14th of October 1943, the day the crews called Black Thursday, the 8th Air Force sent 291 B-17s to the ball-bearing works at Schweinfurt. 60 of them did not come back. Many more returned damaged beyond repair. It was one of the worst single days in the history of American air power. The gunners on those aircraft claimed 288 German fighters destroyed. German records for that day show losses in the region of 40. That is not a small discrepancy. That is a factor of 7, and it was not dishonesty. It is a structural property of the situation. 6 or 8 gunners in different aircraft all fire at the same fighter as it flashes past. It smokes and dives away, which is also what a pilot does deliberately to disengage. Every one of them, in good faith, reports a kill. There is no way to reconcile the claims, because nobody in that formation has the time or the vantage point to do it, and the intelligence officer on the ground taking the reports has no independent source. The same inflation ran through the whole campaign. Bomber gunner claims across the daylight offensive were overstated by a very large multiple. So the flying fortress, the armored animal bristling with 13 guns, was not shooting down the Luftwaffe. It never was. The defensive firepower of the American heavy bomber formation was, as a killing mechanism, mostly a myth, And it was a myth the Americans believed themselves, which is why they persisted with unescorted deep penetration missions into the autumn of 1943 and lost thousands of men proving it was wrong. Here is what the box was actually doing, and it is not nothing. It was setting a price. Every attack on a well-flown combat box cost the attacker something. Seconds of exposure, a compressed and awkward firing solution, a break-off that had to be judged precisely, damage that had to be nursed home, and the constant knowledge that a mistake in the approach was fatal. Under that pressure, pilots fire early. They fire from too far out, where the 50 caliber rounds from the formation still reach and their own cannon rounds are already scattering. They break off before the optimum moment. They take the shot they can survive rather than the shot that would kill. The box did not shoot down the Luftwaffe. It degraded the Luftwaffe's aim, and it made every single pass expensive, and the aggregate of that across thousands of sorties is a bomber stream that arrived over the target instead of being destroyed on the way. That is a suppression weapon. It is exactly the same logic as American artillery firing at a road junction where nobody is standing. The metric is not what you killed. The metric is what you prevented. If your father or grandfather flew in a heavy bomber crew, pilot, navigator, bombardier, engineer, radio operator, or in any of the gun positions, I genuinely like to hear it in the comments. Group, squadron, and how many missions he finished. Those crews are almost all gone now, and their families hold what is left of it. Part 5. The Armored Return. And then, in 1944, the Luftwaffe came back to the rear. They did it deliberately, and they did it with a solution that tells you exactly how bad the problem had been. The concept came from an officer named Hans Gunther von Kornatzky, and it was brutally simple. If the difficulty with attacking a bomber from astern is that you must survive half a minute inside the defensive cone, then build an aircraft that can survive half a minute inside the defensive cone. The result was the Sturmgruppen, assault groups flying Focke-Wulf 190s modified into something closer to a flying tank, steel plate around the cockpit, thick armored glass panels beside the pilot's head. Armament reduced to a pair of 30mm cannon, a weapon so destructive that 2 or 3 hits would take a 4-engine bomber apart. The tactics went with it. Close from behind in a tight formation, ignore the defensive fire, do not open fire until you are close enough that you cannot miss, and press the attack to point-blank range. Pilots in these units were expected to press home the attack to a degree that ordinary fighter doctrine would call suicidal, and on the occasions when it worked it was devastating. Sturmgruppe attacks destroyed entire squadrons of bombers in single engagements. It also came too late to matter, and the reason had nothing to do with anything in this video. By the spring of 1944, the P-51 Mustang had arrived in strength, and a heavily armed Focke-Wulf carrying all that steel is slow and unmaneuverable, and a slow, unmaneuverable fighter in a sky full of escort fighters is not a weapon, it is a target. The Sturmgruppen suffered severely, and the men flying them were among the last experienced pilots Germany had. So the whole argument, 30 seconds astern, 2 seconds head-on, the chin turret, the armor plate, resolved not by either side winning it, but by the arrival of a third aircraft that made the entire question obsolete. The bombers never did defend themselves successfully. They survived until somebody could defend them. Verdict: the verdict on the combat box is that it was a holding action made out of geometry, and it worked, and the price was paid by 19-year-olds. Look at what it actually asked of them. The box only functions if every aircraft holds its exact position relative to every other aircraft, which means no evasion, not through the fighters, not through the flak. A crew under attack could not turn, could not dive, could not do a single one of the things every instinct in a human body demands. They had to sit in formation and let it happen, because breaking formation meant losing the mutual protection and being killed alone, and it meant opening a hole in the geometry that would get somebody else killed too. They did that at 25,000 feet, in temperatures around 40 and 50 below zero, for 6, 8, 10 hours. Waist gunners stood at open windows in that. Frostbite injuries ran into the thousands, and there were missions where more men were hurt by the cold than by the Germans. The ball turret gunner spent the mission curled into a sphere under the aircraft that he could not get out of quickly, and everyone in the crew knew it. The 8th Air Force lost around 26,000 men killed. That is more combat deaths than the entire United States Marine Corps suffered in the Second World War, across every island in the Pacific, and it was taken by a force whose men slept in beds in England and had breakfast before they died. A tour was 25 missions before the numbers were revised upward. At the loss rates of 1943, finishing 25 was, statistically, not the expected outcome. The men doing the arithmetic in their bunks understood this perfectly well. They flew anyway, and what it bought was 13 months. From the first deep penetrations to the arrival of long-range escort in strength, the box was the only thing keeping the daylight campaign alive, and it kept it alive not by killing the German fighter force, but by making the German fighter force pay for every pass until somebody built an aircraft that could go all the way to the target. The best-known thing ever written about any of this is a poem of 5 lines by Randall Jarrell about a ball turret gunner. It does not describe combat. It describes a man being taken from his mother's sleep and put into the belly of an aircraft, and then it describes, in one short and unbearable final line, what was done with what was left of him. 5 lines. It has outlasted every claim of 288 enemy aircraft destroyed. That is generally how it goes. The numbers the war believed about itself turn out to be wrong by a factor of 7, and the thing that survives is a description of a boy who did not. If this audit gave you something to think about, hit the like button. It puts this in front of the people who want the history the way it actually worked, not the way it looked in the newsreels. Subscribe if you want the next one, because there are more of these. More weapons that did something other than what everyone thought. More men who paid for the gap between the two. And remember what the combat box actually was. Not a fortress, a formation of boys holding a straight line because the geometry required it, until somebody built them an escort.